March 21st, 1918. 4:47 hours. Trench position Devil's Corner, Somme Valley, France. The world ended in fire and thunder. Sergeant Marcus Holt of the British 2nd Battalion, Duke of Wellington's regiment, pressed his face into mud that tasted of cordite, blood, and 3 years of accumulated death. The German bombardment had entered its third hour, and each minute felt like drowning in sound. 150mm shells screamed overhead like falling angels, each impact sending geysers of earth skyward that rained back down as chunks of France mixed with fragments of men who had occupied that particular piece of ground seconds before. A shell landed 15 yards to Holt's left. The concussion lifted him off the duckboards and slammed him against the trench wall hard enough to crack ribs. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything except the deep bass rumble of explosions that he felt in his chest rather than heard. Through vision blurred by mud and blast shock, he watched Private Danny Morrison simply cease to exist. One moment the boy was crouched in a firing bay, hands over his helmet, praying to a god who seemed to have abandoned this corner of France. The next moment there was only red mist and a boot still containing most of a foot. Holt had seen this before. The Somme in 1916, Passchendaele in 1917, Ypres, Arras, a dozen other places where the British Army had fed men into German machine guns like coal into a furnace. He'd learned to recognize the pattern. The preparatory bombardment, the infantry assault, the slaughter. He'd survived by understanding the rhythm of industrial warfare, by learning to read the battlefield like a farmer reads weather. What he was reading now terrified him. This wasn't a normal bombardment. This was systematic annihilation. The Germans weren't just softening defenses. They were erasing them, destroying everything, creating a moonscape where a trench system had existed. This wasn't preparation for an attack. This was preparation for an avalanche. At precisely 4:50, the bombardment lifted. The sudden silence was physically painful, broken only by the screaming of wounded men and the ringing in everyone's ears. Holt forced himself upright, ribs grinding against each other, and looked along the trench line. Devil's Corner had been a masterpiece of defensive engineering. 6 months of work by soldiers who knew they'd have to fight from these positions. Traverses every 20 yards to contain blast. Firing steps with interlocking fields of fire. Deep dugouts with reinforced roofs. Machine gun positions protected by steel shields. Communication trenches linking to the main line. Everything built according to hard-won experience from 3 years of trench warfare. 3 hours of German artillery had reduced it to a wounded animal. Traverses collapsed. Dugouts sealed with men inside, their muffled screams audible through tons of earth. Firing positions cratered. The carefully constructed fortress now resembled a fresh grave, which for many of its defenders, it had become. Count off. Holt's voice was raw, barely audible over the ringing in his ears. Section leaders, report. The responses came back slowly. Corporal Davies, 3rd Platoon, 19 effectives, for wounded, 8 dead or missing. Sergeant Miller, 2nd Platoon, 23 effectives, 3 wounded, 12 dead. Private Edwards, temporary leader of 1st Platoon after their sergeant's head had been removed by shrapnel. 17 effectives, 2 wounded, 9 dead. The mathematics accumulated. 287 soldiers remained combat effective in Devil's Corner. 58 dead confirmed, another 19 wounded too severely to fight, 23 missing, probably buried in collapsed dugouts. Captain Thornton was dead. Lieutenant Graves was dead. Lieutenant Morrison was wounded and delirious. Command had fallen to a sergeant from Sheffield who'd been making cutlery 3 years ago. And through the smoke and cordite haze, through the ringing in his ears and the pain in his ribs, Marcus Holt saw them coming. Gray uniforms emerging from morning fog like something from mythology. Not in the neat parade ground formations of early war. These were veterans, moving in squad rushes, using shell craters for cover. But behind the first wave came something that made Holt's breath catch. Massachusetts' pure, overwhelming mass. Formations that stretched from one end of his visual range to the other. More soldiers than he could count. More than he'd ever seen advancing simultaneously in 3 years of war. He grabbed the binoculars from what remained of Captain Thornton, tried to steady his shaking hands enough to focus. Started counting formations. 10, 20, 30 companies visible. Each company 300 strong in German organization. Simple arithmetic provided a number that couldn't be right. Over 10,000 soldiers advancing toward a trench held by 287 British soldiers. Private Tommy Chambers, 18 years old with acne still visible beneath 3 days of accumulated mud, appeared at Holt's elbow. The boy's hands shook as he clutched his Lee Enfield rifle like a drowning man clutches driftwood. "Sarge," his voice cracked, teenage adolescence not quite squeezed out by 3 months on the Western Front. "Sarge, there's thousands of them. Bloody thousands. We can't hold this. We need to fall back. We need to hold this trench," Holt interrupted, his voice cold and steady despite the fear churning in his gut. He'd learned early that soldiers take their emotional cues from their leaders. Show fear, and fear spreads like gangrene. Show confidence, even false confidence, and men find courage they didn't know they possessed. "Listen to me, Tommy. Look at me. Look at my face." Chambers met his eyes, found something there that steadied him slightly. "The Germans sent 10,000 men to take our trench," Holt continued. 10,000. That means this position matters. That means if we break, something important breaks behind us. You understand? We're not just holding dirt and sandbags. We're holding the gate. Everything worth defending is behind Devil's Corner. Our mates in the support trenches, the artillery positions, the supply lines, the channel ports, England, your family, my family, everything. The Germans know that. That's why they sent 10,000 men. Because this trench is the lock, and if they turn it, the whole door swings open. Around them, men were preparing to die. Some prayed, lips moving in silent conversation with deities who seemed absent from the Western Front. Some wept quietly, tears cutting clean lines through mud-caked faces. Some stared at the advancing mass with eyes that had already accepted death and were simply waiting for it to arrive. Some checked their rifles with mechanical precision, muscle memory from 10,000 repetitions creating calm in chaos. Private Edwards, the schoolteacher from Birmingham who could recite Wordsworth and calculate artillery trajectories with equal facility, laughed. It was the laugh of a man confronting absurdity too large to process. "Marcus, I can do mathematics. I teach mathematics. Or taught it before this." He gestured at the advancing Germans. "We have 287 rifles. They have 10,000. That's 35 Germans for every one of us. Even if we each kill 30 of them, we still lose. The numbers don't work. The mathematics are impossible. Then we'd better kill 40 each," Holt replied. He raised his voice so the nearby sections could hear. "Fix bayonets. Load magazines. And remember that we're British soldiers standing in a British trench on what used to be French soil, but is now just mud that doesn't belong to anyone except whoever's willing to die for it." The Germans think numbers will break us. They think that because they have 10,000 men and we have 300, that means they've already won. I say we teach them that numbers don't mean shit when British soldiers decide to hold a line. He pulled his own bayonet from its scabbard, the 17-inch blade catching early morning light. The metallic click as it locked onto his rifle's muzzle was somehow reassuring, a sound of purpose in the chaos. Around him, 287 men performed the same action. 287 17-inch blades attached to rifles. 287 soldiers accepting that they would probably die in the next few hours, but deciding that if death was inevitable, they'd make the Germans pay for every yard of mud. Corporal William Davies, a Welsh coal miner whose hands bore scars from 20 years underground before the war added different scars, moved to his Lewis gun position. The .303 caliber machine gun sat behind a steel shield that bore the dents and scrapes of 3 months of use. Davies knew this weapon like he knew the face of his wife. Every quirk, every tendency to jam, every way to coax maximum performance from British engineering that was reliable, if not sophisticated. He checked the ammunition drum. 47 rounds remaining in this drum, plus 3 full drums cached nearby. 247 rounds total. At 500 rounds per minute cyclic rate, that was approximately 30 seconds of continuous fire. Not much, but Davies had learned to make every second count. Coming up on 300 yards, he muttered, watching the Germans advance. 275, 250. "Sarge, when do we engage?" Holt forced himself to wait. Ammunition was finite. The Germans were infinite, or near enough that the difference didn't matter. Every round had to count. "Hold your fire," he called along the line. "Front rank, aim at 200 yards. We fire in volleys. Controlled fire. Make them think we have unlimited ammunition. Make them think we can do this all day." The Germans reached 250 yards. 225. 200. Close enough now that individual faces were visible. Young faces mostly. Boys like Tommy Chambers, conscripted from German farms and factories, told they were fighting for the fatherland, probably terrified despite 3 years of propaganda about German superiority and British weakness. Men who would die in the next few minutes because High Command had decided that this trench was worth 10,000 lives. At 200 yards precisely, Holt gave the order. "Front rank. Fire." 60 Lee Enfield rifles fired simultaneously. The coordinated volley was a throwback to Napoleonic warfare, but it created a sound that was psychologically devastating. Not the scattered crack of individual shots, but a single massive explosion of rifle fire that sounded like a wall of steel materializing in front of the German advance. The German front rank disintegrated. 60 men fell in less than a second, each struck by a .303 round traveling at 2,800 feet per second, each round carrying enough kinetic energy to punch through a human torso and keep going. The Germans behind them faltered, confronted suddenly with the reality that the British trench they'd been told was destroyed still had teeth. "Second rank, fire." Holt ordered. Another 60 rifles. Another 60 Germans fell. The advance wavered. Officers shouted orders, tried to maintain momentum, but men who have just watched their comrades die tend to seek cover, and no man's land offered plenty of shell craters for protection. Third rank, fire. 180 rounds in 15 seconds. 180 Germans dead or wounded. The first assault broke before reaching 150 yards, the survivors seeking shelter in craters and behind the corpses of their fallen comrades. "Cease fire." Holt commanded. "Conserve ammunition. Reload. They'll come again." Private Edwards, his academic mind still functional despite the chaos, did quick calculations. 4,000 rounds expended in the first engagement. Each man started with 150. That's almost a third of our total ammunition gone in 15 seconds. "Marcus, at this rate, will be empty before noon." "Then we'd better make them afraid to attack," Holt replied. "Davies, give them a burst. Remind them we have machine guns." The Lewis gun opened up, 5-second burst that sent 30 rounds screaming across no man's land. Germans who had been preparing to resume the advance ducked back into cover. The message was clear. The British position still had firepower. But Holt could see the Germans regrouping. Officers moved among the crater-bound soldiers, reorganizing, preparing for a second assault. And behind the first wave, more formations were moving forward. Always more. The arithmetic was brutal and simple. The Germans could afford to lose 300 men taking this trench and still have massive numerical superiority. The British couldn't afford to lose anyone. Sergeant Holt, a runner, appeared, mud-caked and gasping, having sprinted through communication trenches from Battalion HQ. "Message from Colonel Henderson, sir." Holt took the paper with hands that wanted to shake, but refused to. The message was brief. German offensive across entire front. Multiple breakthroughs. Flanks compromised. Devil's Corner now isolated salient. Hold position essential to prevent complete collapse of sector. Reinforcements impossible. Do your duty. Good luck. He read it twice to make sure he understood, then handed it to Edwards. "Translate that for me. Use small words." Edwards scanned the message, his teacher's face going pale. "We're cut off. The Germans have broken through on both sides. Devil's Corner is now surrounded. We're supposed to hold here and tie down German forces while they try to stabilize the line elsewhere. Reinforcements aren't coming. We're alone. How long are we supposed to hold?" "It doesn't say. Just hold position essential." "Which means until we're all dead, probably." Holt nodded slowly, processing this. Isolated. Surrounded. No hope of relief. Against 10,000 Germans. The mathematics had gone from bad to impossible. But he'd known this would happen eventually. Every soldier on the Western Front knew. Somewhere, somehow, the war would put you in a position where survival was impossible and duty demanded you stay anyway. This was his position. This was his moment. He gathered his section leaders. 8 men, none older than 30, all veterans who had survived battles that killed millions. Corporal Davies with his Welsh accent and coal-scarred hands. Sergeant Miller, for years on the front, who'd survived the Somme through luck and skill in roughly equal measure. Private Edwards with his university education and ability to remain analytical even in chaos. Private Jenkins, who'd lied about his age at 16 and was now 20, ancient by Western Front standards, with a killer instinct that would have terrified his mother. Lance Corporal Morrison, no relation to the dead private, who'd been a clerk before the war and had discovered he was good at killing. Private Atkins, former boxer who'd won 15 professional fights and now fought Germans with the same cold efficiency. Corporal Westwood, farm boy from Yorkshire who understood terrain and fields of fire instinctively. Private Richardson, medic who'd saved more lives than he could count and now carried a rifle because there wasn't enough medical supplies to justify pure medical personnel. Right, lads. Holt laid out his crude map scratched in mud. We're surrounded. Germans to front, Germans to both flanks, Germans behind us. Battalion estimates at least 10,000 in this sector, probably more. We have 287 effectives, for Lewis guns with limited ammunition, rifles with approximately 100 rounds per man, against 10,000. The mathematics are shit. So we're fucked, Jenkins said flatly. Not a question, an assessment. We're fucked if we retreat, Holt corrected. But we can't retreat anyway because we're surrounded. We're fucked if we surrender, but that's not happening because we're British soldiers and we don't surrender when we're outnumbered. We just kill more of them per man. So yes, we're fucked, but we're going to hold this trench and make the Germans pay for it until we physically cannot fight anymore. Questions. How long do we need to hold? Davies asked. As long as possible. Every hour we hold is an hour the line can stabilize behind us. Every German tied down attacking Devil's Corner is a German who can exploit breakthroughs elsewhere. We're not fighting for this trench anymore. We're fighting for the entire sector. They can hit us from every direction, Edwards observed. We don't have enough men to defend a 360-degree perimeter. Then we don't defend everywhere, Holt replied. We defend choke points, trench junctions, communication trenches, places where their numbers don't matter because they can only come at us in restricted frontage. We've been here 6 months. We know this ground. Every traverse, every dugout, every firing position. They're attacking into terrain we know like home. So we use that. We make them pay for every foot. Sergeant Miller, the oldest at 29, spoke quietly. Marcus, even if we hold today, they'll hit us tomorrow. And the next day. We can't win this. We're not trying to win, Holt said simply. We're trying to not lose for as long as possible. There's a difference. Now get back to your sections. The Germans are forming up again. This time they'll come from multiple directions. Be ready. Hour 2, 6:15, the Noose tightens. The second German assault came at 6:15, and it came from 3 directions simultaneously. No more massed formations presenting easy targets. The Germans had learned. They sent infiltration teams forward under covering fire from machine guns and mortars positioned in captured trenches. Small groups, moving fast, using terrain, probing for weaknesses. Holt had anticipated this. He'd positioned his men in teams, each responsible for a sector. When Germans penetrated one area, that team would fall back to secondary positions while neighboring teams hit the penetration from flanks with grenades and rifle fire. The first penetration came at 6:23 on the eastern communication trench. 18 German stormtroopers, elite assault infantry, broke through the forward positions and pushed 30 yards into the trench system, killing 4 British soldiers in the process. They moved with professional efficiency, grenades clearing traverses, submachine guns suppressing resistance. Corporal Davies took 8 men through a parallel trench, moving silently despite the chaos. They approached through a connecting passage that the Germans didn't know existed, emerging behind the infiltrators. Davies didn't give orders. Didn't need to. His men knew the drill. Grenades first. 4 Mills bombs arced through the air, their distinctive shape like small pineapples, deadly accurate from men who'd been throwing them for years. The explosions in the confined trench space were catastrophic. Body parts painted the walls. The concussion alone killed 3 Germans. The remaining stormtroopers turned to face this new threat and found themselves in a crossfire between Davies's team and British soldiers in forward positions who'd recovered from the initial shock. The close-quarters battle lasted 93 seconds. Davies killed 2 Germans with his bayonet, the 17-inch blade finding flesh with practiced efficiency. Private Atkins, the former boxer, crushed a German's skull with his rifle butt, the woodstock shattering from the impact, but the German dying instantly. Lance Corporal Morrison shot one at point-blank range, the muzzle flash burning the German's uniform. When it ended, all 18 Germans were dead. Davies had lost 3 men. The mathematical exchange favored the British 6-1, but the British couldn't afford any casualties. The Germans could afford to lose 10 men for every British soldier and still win through arithmetic. "They're testing us," Davies reported to Holt, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead where shrapnel had creased his helmet. "That wasn't a serious assault. That was reconnaissance. They're learning the trench layout, finding weak points. Then we make sure they find nothing but strength," Holt replied. "Rotate your men. Get the wounded to Richardson. Redistribute ammunition from the dead. We do this again in 20 minutes." He was right. At 6:47, Germans attacked from the west. At 7:12, from the north. Each attack was thrown back, but each cost British lives. By 8 o'clock, Holt had 238 effectives, 49 dead in 3 hours. Ammunition was becoming critical. Lewis guns were down to perhaps 4,000 rounds total. Individual rifles averaged 75 rounds per man. But something unexpected happened at 8:15 that changed the equation slightly. A German assault on the northern sector was thrown back with heavy casualties, leaving 53 German bodies in and around the British positions. Among the dead were ammunition carriers, each loaded with 200 rounds of 7.92 mm Mauser rifle cartridges. Private Edwards, always thinking, saw the opportunity. The ammunition won't fit Lee Enfields, but there are German Gurt 98 rifles all over this battlefield. We can use their weapons against them. Private Jenkins, now armed with a Gurt 98, killed 4 Germans with their own weapon during the next assault. "How's that feel, you bastards?" he shouted, working the Mauser bolt. "Killed by your own bloody guns. Your mate's rifle. Your brother's bullets." But the German attacks continued, relentless, grinding. Every 30 to 40 minutes, a new assault from a new direction. Never giving the defenders time to rest. Never allowing recovery. A systematic approach designed to wear down resistance through attrition. Hour 4, 8:45, breaking points. By 8:45, the psychological strain was becoming as dangerous as the physical casualties. Men who had been fighting for 4 hours straight, who had seen friends die, who understood they were mathematically doomed, began to crack. Private Henderson, a farm boy from Kent who'd been solid for 3 months, suddenly stood up in the middle of an assault and started walking toward the German lines, hands raised. "I surrender. I fucking surrender. I can't do this anymore." He made it 5 steps before a German bullet found his chest. He fell face first into the mud, dead before he understood that surrender wasn't an option, that the Germans were shooting anyone who appeared regardless of whether they were surrendering or fighting. "Nobody else tries that." Holt's voice cracked like a whip. "You want to stop fighting? Fine. But you'll die, British. You'll die in this trench. You don't die walking away from your mates. Anyone else thinking about surrendering better think about Henderson. The Germans aren't taking prisoners today, so your choices are fight or die. Those are the only choices." Private Chambers, the teenager, was shaking uncontrollably, tears cutting clean lines through the mud on his face. "Sarge, I can't feel my hands. My hands won't stop shaking. I can't work my bolt. I can't fight anymore." Holt grabbed the boy by his uniform, pulled him close, spoke directly into his face. "Tommy, look at me. Look at my face. You can fight. Your body is telling you to run because your body wants to live. But your body doesn't understand duty. Your body doesn't understand that running isn't an option. So you tell your body to shut the fuck up and keep working that bolt. You've killed what? 15 Germans today." 17, Chambers whispered. "I counted. 17. Good. Kill 17 more by tonight, and you'll have killed 34. That's more than your share. That's more than 35 to 1. You do that, and you'll have done your duty. So breathe. Reload your rifle. And keep fighting. Can you do that?" Chambers nodded, the shaking subsiding slightly. "Yes, Sarge. Good lad. Now get back on the line." At 9:30, Sergeant Miller died. A German mortar round landed directly in his position, and Miller simply ceased to exist. One moment he was shouting orders to his section. The next moment, there was a crater in pieces that used to be a man. Miller had been the steady hand, the veteran voice that men listened to when they were afraid. His loss hit the defenders hard. Several men openly wept. Others stared at the crater with expressions that suggested they were calculating when their turn would come. Listen to me. Holt's voice cut through the grief. Miller survived 4 years of this hell. For years. He beat the Somme. He beat Ypres. He beat Passchendaele. He was the hardest bastard I ever met. And a fucking lucky mortar got him. That's this war. That's what we're in. Luck matters. But luck favors the active. So we keep moving, keep fighting, keep making the Germans pay. Because if we stop, if we give up, then Miller died for nothing. All of them died for nothing. So we honor them by holding this fucking trench. By making the Germans regret ever seeing Devil's Corner. Are you with me? The responding roar was primal, rage and grief channeled into defiance. Yes, Sarge. Then load your fucking rifles and kill some more Germans. Hour 6, 10:30, Yellow Death. At 10:30, the wind shifted from northeast to southwest. The Germans, recognizing the opportunity, launched gas shells into Devil's Corner. Mustard gas, the most feared weapon on the Western Front. Yellow-green clouds that burned lungs, blistered skin, caused blindness, and killed in minutes of exposure. Gas, gas, gas. The cry echoed along the trench, the most terrifying words a soldier could hear. Men fumbled for gas masks, pulling the rubberized canvas over their faces with speed born from drill and terror. The masks were claustrophobic, limiting vision to narrow eyepieces, making breathing labored and difficult. But they were the difference between life and a death so horrible that men who'd seen it would take a bullet over gas exposure any day. Private Wilkins couldn't get his mask on. Shrapnel had damaged it during the morning bombardment, tearing the rubber seal. He didn't realize until the gas hit his face. He took one breath of the yellow-green cloud, and his lungs began burning from the inside. He fell to his knees, clawing at his throat, trying to breathe through airways that were swelling shut. Richardson, the medic, grabbed him, tried to help, but there was nothing to do. Wilkins died in 90 seconds, drowning in open air, his face turning purple, his eyes bulging, foam bubbling from his mouth. 22 men died from gas exposure. Some because their masks were damaged. Some because they were too slow getting them on. Some because they panicked and pulled them off too early. 22 men who experienced death's cruelest form, suffocating while surrounded by air. The Germans attacked immediately behind the gas cloud, expecting the British to be blind and disorganized. They were wrong. Holt had drilled his men on gas defense obsessively. They knew their positions by touch. They had practiced loading rifles blindfolded. They could fight in gas masks, and they'd trained to do it until the masks felt like second skin. The Germans advancing through their own gas cloud found British rifles waiting. Through the eyepieces, at 50 yards, a German presented a clear target. The British fired by volume, not precision, turning the gas cloud into a killing zone where Germans fell by dozens. But fighting in gas masks was exhausting. The limited airflow meant men tired quickly. Vision restrictions meant situational awareness suffered. And the psychological impact of fighting while struggling to breathe was immense. Private Chambers shot a German at 30 yards, then collapsed against the trench wall, hyperventilating inside his mask. "Can't breathe," he gasped. "Can't breathe." "You can breathe." Edwards was beside him, his teacher's voice cutting through panic. "The mask works. You're getting air. Your brain thinks you're suffocating, but you're not. Breathe slowly. In through your nose. Out through your mouth. That's it. You're breathing. You're fine." Chambers's breathing slowed. He nodded, pushed himself upright, resumed firing. Kill number 23, then 24, then 25. The gas attack failed militarily, but psychologically it achieved its goal. By 11:30, when the gas finally cleared, the defenders were exhausted beyond measure. They'd been fighting for over 6 hours. They'd beaten back 8 separate assaults. They'd killed hundreds of Germans. But they were breaking. Holt had 196 effectives remaining. Lewis guns were down to 1,800 rounds. Rifles averaged 45 rounds per man. They'd been fighting for 6.5 hours. Some men hadn't eaten since yesterday. Water was running low. Medical supplies were exhausted. The wounded were being treated with field dressings and hope because there was nothing else. And the Germans were preparing another assault. Hour 8, 12:30, The offer. At 12:30, something unexpected happened. A German officer approached under a white flag. A formal parley, requesting surrender under the recognized conventions of warfare. Holt climbed out of the trench to meet him, both men exposed to sniper fire, trusting in the temporary truce. The German was a major, late 30s, Iron Cross first class at his throat, eyes that had seen too much death but hadn't become numb to it. A professional soldier, not a fanatic. "I am Major Klaus Reinhardt, 84th Infantry Regiment," the German said in English that carried only a slight accent. "I am authorized to offer terms. You have fought with courage and honor. You have inflicted significant casualties on forces many times your strength. But you are surrounded. You are outnumbered. You have no supplies, no reinforcements, no hope of relief. Surrender now, with honor, and you will be treated as prisoners of war according to the conventions. Continue fighting, and you will all die. There is no shame in accepting impossible mathematics." Holt studied the man. He seemed genuine, tired, a professional who respected the enemy he faced and saw no point in additional bloodshed when the outcome was predetermined. "How many men have you lost taking this trench, Major?" Holt asked. Reinhardt hesitated, clearly debating whether to answer. "That information is not relevant to." "I think it's very relevant," Holt interrupted. "You've been attacking for over 6 hours with what we estimate is at least 10,000 men. You still don't have this trench. So I'm curious, how many of your men have died trying to take what you think is impossible mathematics?" Reinhardt's jaw tightened. "Over 1,000 casualties, dead and wounded. But we have reinforcements. More divisions available if needed. You do not. This ends one way, Sergeant. Let it end without more death." "I appreciate the offer," Holt said slowly. "Truly, I appreciate that you're a professional who doesn't want to waste lives. But I have orders to hold this position. Those orders haven't changed. And those orders don't include surrender as an option. So respectfully, Major Reinhardt, you should return to your lines and tell your commanders that if they want Devil's Corner, they'll have to take it. We're not leaving. We're not surrendering. We're British soldiers standing in a British trench, and we'll be here until we're dead. Those are the only terms I can offer." Reinhardt looked at the exhausted, filthy men visible in the trench. Men who were mathematically doomed. Men who understood they were going to die. Still holding rifles. Still ready to fight. "You British are mad," Reinhardt said quietly. "Completely mad. But I respect it. I will tell them you refuse terms. They will not offer again. The next assault will be with everything we have. No mercy. No quarter. You will die to the last man." "We're already dying," Holt replied. "At least we're dying on our own terms. Good day, Major. I'll see you in the next assault." Reinhardt saluted, a gesture of respect between professionals. Holt returned it. Then both men returned to their lines, the brief moment of humanity ending, the machinery of death resuming. Hour 10, 14:30, grinding down. By 14:30, the battle had devolved into a grinding, attritional nightmare that had no parallel in either man's previous experience. The Germans attacked every 45 minutes to an hour. Small unit assaults, company-sized, hitting different sectors, probing for collapse. Each attack was thrown back, but each attack cost British lives. The mathematics were brutal and simple. The Germans could afford to lose 5 men for every British soldier. The British couldn't afford to lose anyone. But men kept dying. Atkins took a bullet through the throat at 13:15, dying in seconds. Westwood died at 13:47 when a grenade exploded next to him. Morrison at 14:22. Each death reduced combat strength. Each death brought the inevitable closer. Ammunition was critical now. Lewis guns were down to 800 rounds total. Rifles averaged 25 rounds per man. Maybe 30 minutes of sustained combat before they'd be fighting with bayonets and bare hands. But the Germans didn't know that. All they saw was continued resistance. All they experienced was rifle fire every time they attacked. So Holt improvised. "Make noise," he ordered. "Fire single shots. Random intervals. Make them think we have ammunition to waste. Throw rocks at night. Sounds like grenades. Make them think we're stronger than we are." Psychological warfare works both ways. For the next 2 hours, Devil's Corner erupted with sporadic fire. Single shots. Short bursts. Explosions from the last actual grenades mixed with loud metallic bangs from empty cans filled with rocks. To German observers, it looked like a position with resources. Defenders who were confident and supplied and ready to hold indefinitely. It was theater, psychological warfare waged by exhausted men who understood that perception mattered as much as reality. And it worked. German attacks became more cautious. Probe, receive fire, pull back, reorganize, probe again. They were being bled by an enemy they thought was stronger than reality. Hour 14, 1830, night falls. Darkness brought temporary cessation of attacks, but no rest. The Germans were using the cover to reposition, bringing up fresh troops and artillery for what everyone understood would be a final push. Holt used the darkness to reorganize his remaining force. 168 effectives. That's what remained of the 287 who'd started the day. 119 dead in 14 hours. Over 40% casualties. By any military standard, the unit was combat ineffective. Except that Devil's Corner was still British. Still holding. Lewis guns had 400 rounds total. Rifles averaged 15 rounds per man. When the Germans came again, the British would have maybe 8 minutes of ammunition. Then it would be bayonets. Then entrenching tools. Then rocks and fists and teeth. Private Edwards, exhausted beyond measure, sat next to Holt in a relatively intact section of trench. We've been fighting for 14 hours. We've killed or wounded what? Over 2,000 Germans? We've held against everything they've thrown at us. But Marcus, we're out of time. Out of ammunition. Out of luck. The next big push breaks us. The mathematics finally win. Then we make sure we go out properly, Holt replied. British soldiers don't surrender. We hold until we can't hold. We fight until we can't fight. And when we die knowing we did our duty. That's all we can do. Private Chambers, no longer the terrified boy from that morning, spoke quietly. I've killed 28 Germans today, Sarge. I counted every one. If I can kill 28 more tomorrow, that's 56. That's more than my share of the mathematics. That feels like enough. It's more than enough, Tommy, Holt replied. You've done the job of 3 men. Every lad here has. Private Jenkins, checking his captured German rifle, added his own calculation. I'm at 33 kills, aiming for 50 by tomorrow night. Make it a nice round number. Something to be proud of when I tell my grandchildren. If I live to have grandchildren. You will. Holt lied. But it was a good lie. The kind that keeps men fighting when logic says to give up. You'll live through this. You'll go home. You'll have a family. And you'll tell them you stood at Devil's Corner with 300 men against 10,000. And you held. Corporal Davies, his face a mask of dried blood and mud, was distributing the last ammunition. 15 rounds per man. 400 rounds total for the Lewis guns. That was everything. The reserve was empty. The caches were dry. When this ammunition ran out, they'd be down to bayonets and desperation. Tomorrow morning, they'll come with everything, Davies said quietly. Everything they have. One final push. And we won't have enough bullets to stop them. Then we stop them another way, Holt replied. The trench is narrow. They can't use their numbers. We set up choke points. Barricades. We make them come at us in single file through killing zones. When we run out of bullets, we use bayonets. When bayonets break, we use entrenching tools. When tools break, we use anything we can swing. And we make them pay for every single foot of this trench in blood. They think they've already won because the mathematics favor them. We show them that some things matter more than mathematics. At 2000 hours, the Germans made one final attempt before darkness settled completely. A night raid. 50 stormtroopers, faces blackened with mud, armed with grenades and knives. They infiltrated silently through no man's land, avoiding the few British sentries, and attacked without warning. The fighting was savage beyond description. Hand-to-hand combat in near-total darkness. Bayonets thrust at shadows. Knives found throats by feel. Men grappled and killed with their bare hands because there wasn't room or time for weapons. The trench became an abattoir where soldiers fought by instinct and rage. Holt killed 4 Germans in the darkness. The first with his bayonet, feeling it punch through uniform and flesh and grate against ribs. The second with his entrenching tool, the blade crushing a skull with a sound he'd hear in nightmares if he lived. The third with his bare hands, fingers finding a throat and squeezing until the struggling stopped. The fourth with a German's own knife, taken from the third man's belt and driven upward through the soft tissue under the jaw into the brain. Private Chambers shot 2 Germans at point-blank range, the muzzle flashes illuminating their faces for split seconds, showing him the terror in their eyes as they died. He killed a third with his bayonet when his rifle jammed, the 17-inch blade finding the German's stomach and twisting as he'd been taught. Corporal Davies fought 3 Germans simultaneously in a traverse junction, his rifle gone, using fists and headbutts and a savagery he didn't know he possessed. He killed one by biting through the carotid artery, the hot blood filling his mouth. Killed another by getting fingers in eye sockets and pulling. The third ran, terrified by the monster Davies had become. Private Edwards, the gentle schoolteacher who had recited Wordsworth to students, became something else entirely. He killed 6 Germans in the darkness with methodical efficiency, each kill executed with the precision of a man solving an equation. Identify target. Close distance. Neutralize threat. Move to next target. No emotion. No hesitation. Just mechanical death. The night raid lasted 23 minutes. When it ended, 47 German bodies lay in and around Devil's Corner. The British had lost 16 men, but those 16 deaths mattered more than any of the previous losses. They were specialists, veterans, men who'd been holding sections together through skill and experience. Holt did the mathematics. 152 effectives remaining, against thousands of Germans who would attack at dawn. Hour 18, 2200 hours, the last inventory. At 2200 hours, Holt gathered his surviving section leaders for what everyone understood might be their last meeting. 5 men, where 8 had stood that morning. Davies, Edwards, Jenkins, Richardson, and a private named Walsh who'd taken over Westwood's section when the corporal died. Ammunition status? Holt asked. Lewis guns have 320 rounds total, Davies reported. That's about 40 seconds of sustained fire. Rifles average 12 rounds per man. Total remaining rifle ammunition is approximately 1,800 rounds. We've also got maybe 30 grenades scattered across all positions. That's enough for one engagement, Edwards calculated. 1 8-minute firefight. Then we're down to bayonets. Medical supplies? Richardson, the medic, shook his head. Nothing. We ran out 6 hours ago. I'm using torn uniforms for bandages. Whiskey from dead men's flasks as antiseptic. The wounded are being treated with hope and prayer because I've got nothing else. Food? Water. Half rations of hardtack. Water's critical. Maybe 6 hours remaining if we're careful. Holt nodded slowly, absorbing the information. By every measurable standard, Devil's Corner was finished. No ammunition. No supplies. No reinforcements. 152 exhausted men against thousands of fresh Germans who would attack at dawn. Right, he said quietly. Here's how tomorrow goes. When they come, and they will come with everything they have, we hold fire until they're at 100 yards. Then we fire by ranks. Controlled volleys. We make every bullet count. When we run out of ammunition, we fix bayonets and we hold this trench in close combat. We don't retreat because there's nowhere to retreat to. We don't surrender because we're British soldiers. We fight until we physically cannot fight anymore. And when we die knowing we held this position for over 30 hours against impossible odds. Questions. How long do we need to hold? Walsh asked. He was young, barely 20, had been promoted to section leader 6 hours ago when his predecessor died. As long as we can, Holt replied. Every hour matters. Every German we tie down here is a German who can't exploit breakthroughs elsewhere. We're not trying to win the war. We're trying to give other men time to stop what we couldn't stop. That's the job. That's the duty. We should be scared, Jenkins said quietly. We should be terrified. But I'm not. I'm just tired. And angry. I'm angry that they think numbers mean they've already won. I want to prove them wrong. Even if it kills me. Especially if it kills me. That's the spirit, Holt said. Channel that. Use it. Tomorrow morning, when they come, remember that rage. Remember every mate who died today. Remember that those deaths only matter if we make them matter. So we fight. We hold. And we make the Germans regret ever seeing Devil's Corner. Hour 22, March 22nd, 2 o'clock, the darkest hour. At 2 o'clock, Private Chambers couldn't sleep. None of them could. Men sat in the darkness, cleaning rifles that were already clean, checking ammunition they'd already counted, doing anything to keep their hands and minds occupied. Thinking too much about tomorrow was dangerous, but not thinking was impossible. Chambers found himself next to Private Edwards in a dugout that smelled of blood and cordite and death. "Sir," he said quietly. Edwards had been a teacher, which made him sir in Chambers's mind, even though they held the same rank. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, Tommy. Do you think we matter? I mean, really matter? We're going to die tomorrow. Probably all of us. And the war will keep going. Millions of men fighting. Will anyone even remember we were here?" Edwards was quiet for a long moment. The Spartans at Thermopylae held for 3 days against the entire Persian army. 300 men against hundreds of thousands. They all died. Every single one. But 2,500 years later, we still remember them. We remember because they prove that some things matter more than numbers. That duty and courage and the willingness to stand when everything says you should run, that matters. History remembers the stands, the impossible defenses, the moments when a small group of men changed outcomes through sheer refusal to accept defeat. But the Spartans lost, Chambers pointed out. They died. Persia won that battle. They lost the battle, Edwards agreed. But their stand gave Athens time to prepare, time to organize, time to eventually win. The 300 bought time with their lives. That's what we're doing, Tommy. We're buying time. And yes, people will remember. They'll remember that 287 British soldiers held Devil's Corner against 10,000 Germans for over 30 hours. They'll remember because it's the kind of story that needs to be remembered. The kind that reminds people what soldiers can do when they refuse to break. "I'm scared," Chambers admitted. "Not of dying. I've accepted that. I'm scared of dying badly. Of running. Of breaking when they come. Of letting everyone down." "You won't," Edwards said with certainty. "You've killed 28 Germans today. You've fought for 22 hours straight. You've seen horrors that would break most men. And you're still here. Still holding your rifle. Still ready to fight. That's not someone who breaks, Tommy. That's a soldier. A real one. Be proud of that." Chambers was quiet for a moment. Then, "Thank you, sir, for teaching me. Not just today. Every day. You made me understand why we fight. Not just because we're ordered to, but because some things are worth dying for." "You're welcome, Tommy. Now try to get some rest. Tomorrow will be hard." Hour 24, 4:47, full circle. At exactly 4:47, 24 hours after the battle began, the German artillery opened up again. Another bombardment, even heavier than the first. The Germans were using everything they had. Heavy guns, field artillery, mortars. For 90 minutes, they pounded what remained of Devil's Corner, trying to eliminate any remaining resistance before the final assault. The bombardment killed 18 men, 18 soldiers who had survived an entire day of combat, who had beaten every assault, who had held when holding should have been impossible, killed by random artillery fire in the final hour. Holt survived through luck. A shell landed 5 feet from his position, should have killed him, but the angle was wrong and the blast went upward instead of lateral. He was thrown 10 feet, had his helmet torn off, felt blood running down his face from a dozen small shrapnel wounds. But he lived. At 6:15, the bombardment lifted. The sudden silence was apocalyptic. Holt pulled himself from the mud, forced his battered body upright, looked along what remained of Devil's Corner. 134 men still stood. 134 out of 287. 53% casualties in 24 hours. The trench was unrecognizable. The carefully constructed defenses were gone. Everything was craters and shattered timbers and bodies in mud. But 134 British soldiers still held rifles, still stood ready. "They're coming," Davies said quietly, pointing to no man's land. And they were. The final assault. Not infiltration teams. Not probing attacks. Everything. 3,000 German soldiers in mass formation, walking forward like men on a parade ground. Rifles at port arms. Bayonets fixed. Officers leading from the front. A human avalanche designed to simply overwhelm through sheer mass. "This is it, lads." Holt's voice cut across the ruined trench. "This is where we stand. No more tactics. No more clever maneuvers. Just us and them. British soldiers against German soldiers. And we show them what that means. Load your rifles. Fix your bayonets. And remember every man who died in this trench. We hold for them. We fight for them. And when we run out of bullets, we fight with steel. And when steel breaks, we fight with our hands. And we don't stop fighting until we're dead. Are you with me?" The responding roar was primal. Rage and grief and exhaustion and determination mixed into pure defiance. Yes, Sarge. Then let's show these German bastards what 300 British soldiers can do. At 300 yards, Holt gave the order. Front rank, aim, fire. 40 rifles fired. 40 Germans fell. Second rank, fire. 40 more rifles. 40 more Germans fell. Third rank, fire. 120 shots in 20 seconds. The German advance didn't even slow. They expected losses. They'd accepted them. 3,000 men could afford to lose 100 and barely notice. At 200 yards, the Lewis guns opened up. 320 rounds total, divided among 4 guns. 20 seconds of sustained fire. Germans fell in windows, cut down by interlocking fields of fire. But the advance continued. Always forward. Always coming. At 150 yards, individual rifle fire. No more volleys. Every man firing as fast as he could work the bolt. The Mad Minute, the legendary British rifle drill. 15 aimed shots per minute. Some men doing 20. 134 rifles firing as fast as men could load and aim. The German front ranks disintegrated. Bodies piled on bodies. But behind them, more kept coming. Over the dead. Through the dead. Using corpses for cover. Still advancing. Rifles clicked on empty chambers. Men reached for cartridges that weren't there. The ammunition was gone. All of it. Every bullet fired. Fix bayonets. Holt's order was unnecessary. Men were already attaching the blades. 17-inch British steel. The Lee Enfield with bayonet attached was 5 feet of killing length. Perfect for trench warfare. The Germans reached Devil's Corner at 6:27. 12 minutes of sustained fire had killed or wounded approximately 700 Germans. But 2,300 made it to the trench. What happened next defied description. It wasn't warfare. It wasn't combat. It was slaughter that went both directions. Men killed with bayonets, entrenching tools, rocks, bare hands. The trench became a pit where soldiers fought like animals because they'd transcended humanity and become pure violence. Holt killed 8 Germans in close combat. The first 3 with his bayonet, feeling the blade punch through cloth and flesh and bone. The fourth with his rifle used as a club after the bayonet stuck in a German's ribs and wood. Wouldn't pull free. The fifth with a German's own knife, taken from a corpse and driven into another German's eye socket. The sixth and seventh with his entrenching tool, the blade designed for digging now caving in skulls. The eighth with his bare hands, fingers crushing a windpipe while the German clawed at his face. Private Chambers killed 6 more Germans. His bayonet thrust through a German's stomach. His rifle but crushed a face. His knife found a throat. A rock bashed in a skull. He strangled one with his bare hands. He bit through another's carotid artery, the hot blood filling his mouth, the taste of copper and death. Then he took a bayonet through his chest. Fell. Killed one more German from the ground, pulling him down and strangling him even as his own life leaked out. Kill number 34. 17 more than his original goal. He died satisfied. Corporal Davies fought like a demon until a German grenade exploded next to him. The blast tore off his right arm and most of his torso. He died instantly. The Welsh coal miner who had survived 20 years underground only to die in a French trench fighting Germans with his bare hands. Private Edwards killed 11 Germans before a bullet found his head. The gentle schoolteacher who recited Wordsworth became an efficient killer who died doing mathematics in his head, calculating how many Germans each British soldier needed to kill to make the defense successful. His last thought was a satisfied conclusion. We exceeded expectations. Private Jenkins reached his goal of 50 kills, got to 52 before 3 Germans overwhelmed him. He died with his hands around a German's throat, squeezing until his own life faded, taking one last enemy with him even in death. The close-quarters battle lasted 47 minutes. 47 minutes of the most savage, brutal, primitive combat imaginable. Men fought until they physically couldn't fight, until their bodies simply gave out, until blood loss killed them. The Germans finally secured Devil's Corner. Of the 134 British soldiers who had met the final assault, 82 were dead. 52 survived, many of them wounded so badly they would die within hours. But the German victory was Pyrrhic beyond comprehension. Of the 3,000 soldiers who had attacked, over 1,800 were casualties, dead or wounded. The trench was so packed with bodies that Germans couldn't walk without stepping on corpses. British and German together, impossible to distinguish, mixed in death as they've been mixed in combat. Hour 36, 8:47, the withdrawal. At 8:47 on March 22nd, 36 hours after the battle began, something impossible happened. The Germans withdrew, not retreated in disorder. An organized withdrawal. Officers moving among their men, organizing, preparing to move north. They were leaving Devil's Corner, abandoning the position they'd fought 2 days to take. Sergeant Marcus Holt, still alive through luck and skill in roughly equal measure, watched through binoculars as German formations pulled back. He couldn't understand it. They'd won. They'd taken the trench. Why were they leaving? 2 hours later, a British runner reached Devil's Corner. He stared at the carnage with the expression of a man who couldn't process what he was seeing. Bodies everywhere. 52 survivors who looked like walking corpses. A trench that resembled hell's blueprint. Message from Colonel Henderson, the runner managed. French counteroffensive to the south succeeded. Broke through German lines. Germans are withdrawing divisions from this sector to contain the breach. Your defense tied down 4 divisions for 2 days. For divisions that weren't available to exploit breakthroughs elsewhere. The French advance succeeded partly because German reserves were committed here. The line held. You won. You held them long enough. Holt sat down heavily. Legs that had held him upright for 36 hours of combat finally gave out. He looked at the 52 survivors. Men who had started as 287. Men who had faced 10,000 Germans and held. "Did we win, Sarge?" someone asked. The voice was young. Might have been Private Walsh. Might have been someone else. Everyone looked the same now. Mud and blood and exhaustion. Holt looked at the ruins of Devil's Corner. At the bodies of his friends. At the evidence of a battle that mathematics said they should have lost in the first hour. At 52 men who had somehow survived the impossible. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We won. We held them long enough. That was the job. We did the job." The final accounting. The official casualty report for Devil's Corner was filed on March 25, 1918. British casualties, 235 killed in action, 52 survivors, 31 wounded, 21 walking wounded. Total engaged, 287. German casualties, estimated from field counts and German records captured in subsequent fighting, 2,967 killed, 4,815 wounded. Total, 7,782 casualties. The mathematics were impossible. A force outnumbered 35-1 had inflicted casualty ratios of approximately 33-1. Every British soldier who fought at Devil's Corner had killed or wounded an average of 27 Germans before dying or surviving. 4 German divisions, approximately 32,000 men, had been committed to taking Devil's Corner over 36 hours. They eventually succeeded in capturing the position, but at such catastrophic cost that the divisions were combat ineffective for weeks afterward. More importantly, those 4 divisions had been unavailable for use elsewhere during the critical 2 days when French forces launched their counteroffensive. The French breakthrough succeeded in part because German reserves that should have reinforced that sector had instead been committed to taking a single trench held by 287 British soldiers who refused to break. Sergeant Marcus Holt survived with wounds to his head, ribs, and left arm. He was awarded the Victoria Cross. He accepted it wearing a uniform that still carried Chambers's blood. "Every man in that trench was a hero," he told the officer presenting the medal. "I just happened to survive. The real heroes are still there, in the mud, in Devil's Corner." Private Tommy Chambers died on the trench wall at 6:51 on March 22nd. He killed 34 Germans in 36 hours of combat. His body was recovered 6 days later. He was 19 years old. His mother received his personal effects in a letter from Holt that she read every day until her death 40 years later. The letter's final sentence: "Your son was the bravest soldier I ever knew, and I knew many brave soldiers." Corporal William Davies died at 6:43 on March 22nd. He was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross. His citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty." Corporal Davies held his position against overwhelming odds, inflicting severe casualties on the enemy. When ammunition was exhausted, he continued to fight in close combat until killed in action. His courage and determination were instrumental in holding a critical position against sustained attack. Private James Edwards died at 6:58 on March 22nd. His family received his university ring and a letter describing his courage. His former students at Birmingham Grammar School erected a memorial plaque that reads, "He taught us about honor. Then he showed us what it meant." Private Robert Jenkins died at 7:03 on March 22nd. He killed 52 Germans in 36 hours. His family never recovered his body. He is remembered on the Thiepval Memorial to the Missing. 52 men survived Devil's Corner. 21 died of wounds within a week. 31 lived to see the war end. Of those 31, most were so physically and psychologically damaged that they never fully recovered. Several committed suicide in the years following the war. Others drank themselves to death. A few managed to build normal lives, though they never spoke about Devil's Corner unless directly asked. The German commander who fought at Devil's Corner, General Wilhelm von Greim, wrote in his memoirs published in 1932, "The defense of Devil's Corner was the most tenacious resistance I encountered in 4 years of war. We attacked with numerical superiority exceeding 30 to 1. We used artillery, gas, infiltration tactics, and mass assault. We lost nearly 8,000 men. We eventually took the position, but at such cost that the victory was meaningless. Those British soldiers fought with a determination I had never witnessed. They proved that numbers alone do not determine outcomes. What matters? Courage matters. The mathematics that suggested they should have fallen in an hour meant nothing because they simply refused to accept defeat. Devil's Corner no longer exists. The Western Front was plowed under after the war, the scarred earth slowly healing. But in the village of Holmfirth in Yorkshire, there's a memorial stone with 287 names. The inscription reads simply, "They held the line against impossible odds." Beneath it, carved by a survivor in 1925, 287 versus 10,000. "We held for 36 hours. 235 died. 52 survived. The mathematics said we'd lose in an hour. We held for a day and a half. Duty matters more than mathematics." The story of Devil's Corner became part of British military legend. It's studied at Sandhurst and military academies worldwide as an example of defensive warfare at its most effective. But the academic analysis misses the human reality. 287 men, most of them conscripts and volunteers who'd been civilians 3 years earlier, faced impossible odds and held because they understood something fundamental. Some positions must be held regardless of cost. The families behind them, the soldiers beside them, the duty they'd sworn to uphold. So they fought, with rifles until ammunition ran out, with bayonets until steel broke, with entrenching tools, rocks, and bare hands until their bodies failed. They fought for 36 hours against an enemy that outnumbered them 35 to 1. 235 died. 52 survived. And the Germans withdrew, defeated not by weapons or tactics, but by human will that refused to break. That's the story of Devil's Corner. That's the story of when 300 men faced 10,000 and refused to surrender. Not because they were superhuman, but because they were British soldiers who understood that some things matter more than numbers. They held the line. Against mathematics. Against logic. Against 10,000 Germans who thought victory was inevitable. The Germans were wrong, and Devil's Corner proved it.